So before we get started, I'm going to share my screen with you so that we can do a little bit of setting the vibe for the space. For me, that's super important, especially given the topic of today's presentation. So I want to start off with this phrase, honor and respect. So in Haitian culture, these two words, honneur and respect, mean a lot to us. They're so important in Haitian culture that we use them as greetings. So when I say honneur, you can say respect. Honneur.
Respect.
Merci, merci,
Respect.
merci.
Respect.
Thank you.
Respect.
Thank you. For me, this is super important, especially since I hope that we can do a little bit of a deep dive into what it means to be an educator, but not just what it means to be an educator, but what does it mean to teach in a revolutionary way. And as I'm using my own work as an educator who is Haitian, whose work focuses on Haiti, you know, it can feel a little bit like, oh, man, this is a lot. This is uncomfortable. And if I haven't made you even a little bit uncomfortable, I haven't really done my job today. So I always lead with honneur and respect because, one, I want to let you know how I'm moving with you, but also I want us to keep that in mind in terms of the questions we ask and how we ask them. You're free to say and ask whatever you want. Just know that it will be received with honneur and respect, and that I hope that you can do the same for each other. So before we do that deep dive into revolutionary teaching, I'd like you to join me in 2 minutes of silence as we meditate on the lives that have been lost during the COVID-19 pandemic. There's a reason why we're meeting virtually today and a reason why we're all Zoomies, as Tom has mentioned before. And it's because of this really emotionally intense pandemic that we're going through. So I'd like to just take 2 minutes where we think about, you know, what the last 6 months have been like for us and how you're feeling. Maybe check in with yourself in these 2 minutes. Ask yourself, where are you? What energy are you bringing to this space? Are you prepared to be part of this workshop today? If not, is there anything you can do to get to a different mental space? So let's take a couple of minutes to do that. So hopefully in that time, you were able to release a little bit of tension, maybe took a couple of deep breaths. I know I hold a lot of tension in my abdomen. I have to remind myself to let go of that. For those of you who hold it in your shoulders, do a little releasing of that now. Cool. All right, so now that we're present and ready to dive, I want to talk to you all a little bit about my journey to education. I didn't set out to be an educator. That's my big secret. Like a good daughter of immigrant parents, my goal was to be my goal was to be a doctor. And so I did the whole pre-med science route, and it was fun and amazing, until I realized that the kind of quality of life that I was looking for, especially in terms of marrying interest with work, wasn't medicine wasn't it for me. I grew up as a hyphenated Haitian, which means I kind of had like one foot in each culture. I like to jokingly say that being hyphenated person means like I like my men wearing Timbs, but also like I like to listen to compa and eat Haitian food every day. So that for me is what being hyphenated and what being a bicultural person can be like. It also means that there's a lot of inner struggle with identity, and a lot of the work that I've done has helped me get a better sense of who I am and how I bring myself to the space of education. After the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, where hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives, I still, whenever I think about it, I just like, it's almost like an unbelievable number of people. But that was for me a really jarring moment that pushed me to activate. And like many other people in the Haitian diaspora, I was looking for ways to give back in a sustainable way. And so I started with where I was. I am a trained linguist. I've always been into languages. And so I decided to start offering these small group workshops for people who were going back to Haiti to do some work, especially some relief work immediately after the earthquake. And those workshops kind of ballooned into something way bigger than expected. And in the fall of 2013, I founded the Haitian Kreyòl Language Institute of New York, which is essentially a space dedicated to the study of Haitian Creole. But we do so much more than just sit down and teach people how to say, hi, my name is Wynnie in Haitian Creole. We also include a very robust cultural piece to it. So we run cultural workshops like the Haitian Tea Party. And if you haven't already guessed that I'm a quasi-millennial because I put hashtags in front of everything, even the title of this workshop is #revolutionary teaching. I do this on purpose so that you can easily find what I'm talking to you about in this social media world, which we're going to dive a little bit more into later. The Haitian Tea Party is where I don't know, I came up with this. I'm convinced my grandmother is working through me in spirit, because I get these like ideas that pop up in my mind and they come from literally nowhere. But one day I was thinking about her and the life that she led. And I said, you know what, I'm just going to host a tea party and I'm going to call it the Haitian Tea Party. It is exactly what it sounds like. We sit around drinking tea, but we also learn about how Haitian people drink tea, which is primarily for medicinal purposes. So although the Haitian Tea Party is like this, you know, catchy, bougie thing that I do with my students and my other participants, it's also a really neat way to package information about a very particular aspect of Haitian culture, which is how we use the land to heal our bodies. And then a couple of years ago, I co-founded a language immersion program for children called Jardin Timoun. And so there now exists a language immersion program where anybody who's interested in having their children ages 0 through 12 dive into learning Haitian Creole. It's here in New York City. And that's super exciting. In the past 2 years, we've helped dozens and dozens of families engage in Haitian Creole with their children. And it's been challenging because for those of you who work with kids, I feel you. I don't know how How many people here work with kids under the age of 12? If you do, you can put a Zoom thumbs up or just the actual thumbs up. Yeah, I don't know how y'all do it. Y'all are really doing the work of the universe, because it is a fun and challenging, but also great learning experience too. So that has been really cool for me in the past couple of years to dive into that space. Since 2015, I've also been teaching Haitian Kreyòl at CLACS as part of the Indigenous and Diasporic Language Consortium, which is a really amazing collaboration between NYU, Columbia, and Lehman, which is part of CUNY, where we teach less commonly taught languages. My sister language at CLACS is Quechua, so it's just, I exist in this world. I think I've said this before to all of you. I exist in this weird intersection of like academia and entrepreneurship and advocacy. So I hope to bring a little bit of that, of each of those parts of me to this workshop today. And I'm going to use myself as a case study in the work that I do as an example of what revolutionary teaching can look like. I've also done work at other universities, but who cares about those other universities? Yes, so let's move on to the next part. I want to talk to you about one of my favorite programs called Mother Tongues United. Mother Tongues United is a space where I bring together speakers of what I like to call historically undervalued languages. And this is how I define a historically undervalued language. A historically undervalued language is a language that suffers from systemic, social, and cultural degradation. It exists in the shadow of a more dominant and socially acceptable, quote unquote, acceptable language, and is spoken by historically disadvantaged and marginalized peoples. Speakers within these historically undervalued linguistic communities are often shamed for speaking their mother tongue while being portrayed as quote unquote uneducated, unintelligent, and unworthy of participating in mainstream societies. So when you hear a definition like this, the first question, well, one of the first questions that should come to your mind is, who gets to determine what is meant by value? And I think this is a question that we can use to guide the work that we do, especially as educators who are looking to create something new and to create something different. I know a lot of you are here because you're creating new programs at your schools, or there's some of you who are here because you're looking to gain access to certain resources that can make your curriculum more robust. And I think that this particular question, who gets to determine what is meant by value, is something that you can use as a starting point for creating that new thing, or shifting that which already exists in your educational space. I want to do just a quick exercise with you all. So if you were to ask your students today, what comes to mind when you think of Haiti, what do you think they would say? What do you think you would say? If you have an answer, you can put it in the chat, you can say it out loud. I just want to get a sense of, you know, Haitian Revolution. I see some folks in the chat saying Haitian Revolution. Zos. Mark, that's a whole other workshop. Just a quick lesson about the word zos. So the word zo en Kreyòl means bone. And I'm not part of this particular generation, although I do sometimes still consider myself Zo, but my understanding of the word Zo is that it originated in South Florida in the Haitian immigrant community. And it was, my understanding is that it was originally a gang affiliated term, but it since shifted to mean to anyone who identifies as a Haitian person in the diaspora. Yeah, immigrants, revolution. This is true. They would be excited to claim it for sure. They usually tell me when a Spanish word is similar. There's so many Spanish words that are similar to Kreyòl, like tas and tasa, busque and buscar. There's a lot of words like that. Yeah, I think that a lot of people might also, if we're doing a deep dive into being radically honest with each other, I think we can also agree that there's still a lot of negative associations with Haiti as well. I also think that there are some people who would say that Haitians come from, you know, excuse my French, shithole countries. So there's still a lot of very negative um, ideas attached to the country of Haiti and the people who come from Haiti. So for me, it's important to have something like the Mother Tongues United program, where I bring people together to talk about what it means to be a speaker of a historically undervalued language. How does it manifest itself in your life? What impact does it have on your day-to-day living? For those who are actively advocating for their languages, what does it mean to advocate for historically undervalued language? What does it mean to create space for that language? And that idea of creating space is something, oh, I want to say hi to whoever that little one was just on the video. I love when the little ones join us for the workshops. That means that they're learning with us. I think that we also have to think very carefully about what it means to create space, which is an idea we're going to come back to several times throughout the rest of the workshop. So the first Mother Tongues United event was a gathering with the speakers of the Garifuna community, speakers of the Quechua community, and speakers of the Kreyòl Haïtien community. And when I tell you that conversation was so spicy, it took place downtown Brooklyn. And we had, y'all, when you bring together people who you wouldn't think have had a similar life experience, but then you start to really examine the impact of language. When you bring folks together like that, it's a lot. It's a lot of stuff that starts to come out. For example, there were some Garifuna in the audience who were sharing their experience of when coming to the United States, experiencing what it means to be Black or Afro-Latino, or their experience of people being surprised that they could also speak Spanish. I had a really amazing Quechua advocate whose name is escaping me. I think her name is Elva. She came and talked about the work that she did with her weekly, she had like weekly, not bingo, but she had like a weekly game night in her house in Park Slope, teaching people Quechua, and then also creating a space for Quechua speakers to just come and have fun and engage with one another. It was really amazing. I was reminded in that moment that the languages that we speak and the cultures that are associated with those languages have a certain kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Have a certain kind of impact on how we see the world in a way that we're not super conscious of until we actually sit down and start to talk about that experience. Over the past few years, I have hosted Mother Tongues United at CLACS. And it has taken a different shape every year, but the idea is always to come back to centering the experience of speakers of historically undervalued languages, and then also creating space to talk about what does it mean to lend a hand to one another. So for example, Haitian Kreyòl has, depending on how you count the census, has anywhere from 1 to 2 million speakers in the diaspora and 8 to 10 million speakers in Haiti. And it is the most widely studied Kreyòl in the world. So a lot of the work that's done around Haitian Creole is used as a template for research in other Creole languages. So I'm always happy to host Mother Tongues United, especially if it means helping speakers of another historically undervalued language get to a space where they can better understand the impact of that language. So over the years, we've had a focus on Creoles of the Caribbean, and we focused on bilingualism in the Caribbean. What does it mean to concentrate on creating a bilingual space for yourself and your family, especially if you are of Caribbean heritage but living outside of the Caribbean. One year we focused on children's literature of the Caribbean. It's been an amazing time with Mother Tongues United. The focus of this year's Mother Tongues United is going to be revolutionary culture and as Tom mentioned earlier, how language can be used as a tool of protest, which we're going to dive a little bit into today. I want to play a short video for you of a Papiamentu scholar named Keisha Wheel, who is going to talk for a few minutes about her experience being shamed for speaking Papiamentu and what that has done to drive the work that she currently does with Papiamentu. And just so you have a little bit of context about Papiamentu, which is a language I didn't even know about until a few years ago. My bad, I can't know everything. But the language of Papiamentu, it is the second, it is one of two Creoles in the Caribbean that's considered an official language of the country where it's spoken. So it's Papiamentu and Haitian Creole. Those are the two Creoles in the Caribbean space where they are like government recognized as official languages. Although, you know, who needs government recognition? You know, the people decide what is official or not, but just throwing that fact out there. But Papiamentu is really interesting because it is a Dutch-based Creole. Y'all, I always forget the Dutch were in the Caribbean, but I mean, we all know Europeans were all over the Caribbean, so there's no surprise there. But the fact that there's still actively Dutch-speaking places in the Caribbean, and then also people of Afro heritage who are actively, oh man, y'all, every time I talk about Creoles, I have to remind people who speak Creole languages are activists because they actually are speaking a language that is a tangible protest against the language of their colonizer. This is actually what, like when you meet somebody who speaks Haitian Creole, they're actually speaking a language that was created out of turmoil, a language that was created in a space of deep violence, a language that was created under deep poverty, and not just financial poverty. I'm talking about what it means to be an enslaved person during the time when Creoles were being created. You're not just financially poor, you're also like spiritually poor and emotionally poor. There's like a deep poverty and a space of having to always survive. And so the fact that people in this environment created a brand new language, y'all, I can't even tell you how powerful that makes me feel, to speak the language of people who were actively protesting their situation 300, 400 years ago. And so Papiamentu is a Dutch-based Creole that's spoken in the ABC Islands, so Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, the ABC Islands. And so Keisha is going to talk to us for a couple of minutes about her experience speaking Papiamentu. And this was which Mother Tongues United was this? I have to go back and look. I believe this might have been the Children's Literature of the Caribbean. But you can find all of these videos on the CLACS YouTube, which I will share in the chat in the next few minutes. So I'm going to play the video. It's only a few minutes long, but after we finish watching it, I'd like to hone in on one word that Keisha uses.
I don't let that deter me from, keeping on.
Yeah, it's interesting because for me, I remember my elementary school was predominantly Haitian American kids, and I do remember the stigma that was geared towards a lot of the Haitian American kids, and I remember, I guess, thinking in terms of that and how we were sort of envisioned. And for us, nobody knew where our islands were. Nobody knew what language we spoke. I remember once being on the phone with a friend and my mom saying something to me, and I responded back, or in Papimento or in English, I can't remember how I responded back. And I remember my friend just telling me, like, what is that? What is that, some type of Spanish you guys are speaking? And I remember at the time just feeling like, well, I'm 11 or so, I don't have time to explain what this is. So I'm just going to be like, and I just said, yeah, that's what it is. And, just kept the conversation going. And as I look back on my childhood, I realized that a lot of it was this idea of, because we come, because my parents come from islands that are so small that not a lot of people know anything about them, I was constantly explaining as from a young age, what my language is, what my culture is, and I think that sort of took a toll on me, where it became a point where I remember, my sister and I, we didn't really speak it at home. So our parents would speak to us in Papimento, and then we would answer back in English a lot. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that, I don't know necessarily if we were ashamed, but it was just sort of this idea of, we don't want to have to put that burden on a child. Even our teachers would be like, oh, well, where is that? What is that? What are you guys speaking? It was something that drained you after a while. And I remember, I think the first time I actually started to place some sort of acceptance and pride, not only within my culture, but in the language specifically, was, I think, my senior year of high school, when I was starting to learn not only about Black American history and ideas of Blackness, but also I was like, okay, well, what is my history? My parents didn't come and grow up in the United States. My parents grew up down there. What is my history? I realized that my history was apart from the rest of the Caribbean, even though it was this idea of, like, we wanted to fit in. And I think that was the main thing for us, was that growing up, in particular for me, I'll speak for myself, we didn't know where to fit in, and that's where that fluid identity comes from. Like I said, because we were such a small community, it was this idea of, like, well, nobody's from the Dutch Caribbean, so do we fit in with the Latinos? Do we fit in with the English Caribbean or the French Caribbean? Where do we go? So I think it wasn't until, like I said, my senior year of high school and then going into college where I sort of actually started to embrace my language and wanted to know more about it and know more about my history. And it was through that I really sort of found my identity in that sense. For instance, I think when it was, maybe my freshman year of college, and I had this professor who said, oh, well, if you're from the Caribbean, I know this other professor who's doing Kreyòl work in Grenada. He's working on the French Creole that's dying out in Grenada. You should totally meet him. I was like, okay, cool, whatever. So I went, and we started talking, and he was just like, oh, you're from Aruba and Curacao, so you speak Papimento? And I was like, yeah, sure, I speak that thing, so what, yeah. And he was just like, that's just so amazing, like, and he started ranting and raving about this language, and I was just like, okay. And that, I think, was the first time that I actually started to think seriously about that language, of what it meant and how powerful it was. And it was because of that meaning that I am where I am today, like having taken pride in that and sort of realizing, no, I should be promoting this, I should be working on this.
There's a story that I always like to tell.
Oh, I'm going to pause here. You don't want to watch me tell a story about while I'm here with you telling other stories.
You've already heard this, but
so Keisha said something I think that was very important. She used the word powerful, and I think that this is why a program like Mother Tongues United is so necessary, because for those of us who want to focus our work on the Caribbean and Latin America, especially for those of us, for example, who might be teaching a population of students who are from there or have that heritage, or even if you are not and you're trying to create materials that are more not just more authentic, but also more honest and truthful about the experience of people from the Caribbean and Latin America, especially people of Afro heritage and indigenous people. There is a need to help people understand the power that exists in those spaces. And I often tell the story of when I realized this always gets me feeling a little bit hot. But when I realized, let's use Haiti as an example. The first time I started to think about how many Black people and how many enslaved people there were on the island versus colonizers, I was really confused, because it's a lot of us in Haiti. It's a lot of us. Like, Haiti is an island of 8 to 10 million people. That's a lot. And we're so Black that the word for man, let's put the patriarchy aside for a moment, but the word for man is this word. I'm going to put it in the chat, this word neg. And for those of us who speak any Romance language, that is the root word for the word Black. But the word neg en Kreyòl, it does not translate to Black man. It just translates to man. So to be a man in Haiti is to be Black inherently. That's how many Black people there are in Haiti. So I was confused. I'm like, well, how come we were the ones in chains if there were so many, many, many more of us? And of course, when you start to think about this, not just as a student, I was thinking about this as a student, who also as an educator, you realize that there's a lot of dehumanization that had to happen. A lot of dehumanization. If we're not talking about that dehumanization that happened in Latin America and the Caribbean, then we're not actually teaching in a revolutionary way. We're not actually approaching our teaching in a radical way. And so when I first started to think about this dehumanization, I ultimately concluded in my work as a linguist and as a language advocate, I concluded that the fact that all of these people were able to create all these brand new languages is the ultimate sign of our humanity. And that for me is what we're doing, not just with the Mother Tongues United program, but generally at CLACS, and then also very prominently at my institute, at the Haitian Creole Language Institute. We're talking about, reclaiming our power and reclaiming our humanity. And this is something that we have to think about really, truly in a radical way, as educators who are who are teaching who are teaching for, you know, not just, you know, from the book or for the test, but like we actually want our students to learn some stuff that they can take away and be armed with when they actually go out into the world. And I talk about arming my students because, well, I'm a daughter of revolutionary people, so I'm always talking about fighting a war. But I really do feel like there are small moments in our day-to-day lives that we're not adequately prepared for. And reminding students of other people's humanity, helping students to center their humanity, creating a program or a curriculum, or I know some of you are, you know, creating modules for your classrooms. Whatever content you're creating, that has to be approached in a radical way, but that also means confronting parts of you that you may not have confronted before. So for example, in my work, I'm always thinking about how can shifting the way a language is viewed be considered a power play. I'm tired. I'm tired of people associating certain things with my language. For example, one of the biggest critiques of Haitian Creole is that it's a highly phonemic language. And this means, for example, we don't have the letter C in Haitian Creole. It doesn't make any sense for us. Let's think about the role that the letter C plays in English. It can sometimes be a hard K sound, like in the word cat, which starts with the letter C, or it could be a soft S sound, like in the word celery, which also starts with the letter C. This will make no sense in a language that's phonemic. In my language, every letter always makes the same sound, always, always. But Kreyòl is constantly critiqued for, oh, well, you know, your language is so easy and simple, and it's almost childish because you can just spell it how it sounds. I'm gonna call you all fam because I feel like we're family right now. Fam. There's another major language spoken in New York City, in the United States, in the world, that's also highly phonemic. What language is that? Let me look at the chat. Yeah, Spanish. Thank you, Sarah. Yes, it's Spanish. For those of you who have learned Spanish, taught Spanish, speak Spanish, you know there's very, very little, once you've got it, you've got it. There's very little variation in how things are spelled. And no one ever critiques Spanish for that, even though Kreyòl is similar to Spanish in that way. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of arming our students and arming ourselves. When we hear critiques like this, if we're actually functioning in a radical way and we're centering revolutionary teaching, the follow-up question should be, well, why? Why is Kreyòl critiqued for the same thing that Spanish is not? And of course, if you do a deep dive into the socio-political history of Kreyòl, you know, the conclusion you should come to is because Kreyòl is a very Black language spoken by very Black people who proudly wear the cloak of Blackness despite the huge backlash for what they did in 1804. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about shifting how language is viewed and using that as a power play. And I want to talk about how social media can be a powerful tool as well if we're talking about language as a tool of protest. So I mentioned earlier that I'm a quasi-millennial because I put hashtags on everything. So I know social media. Let me look at everybody's face. I gotta see where, let me do a room check. I know people feel ways about social media. It can be a cesspool of ridiculousness. Like you can do a deep dive into social media and all of a sudden like 3 hours are gone and now you're questioning your whole sense of maturity. But I like to remind people that social media can be powerful when it's used mindfully. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of 3 hashtags that are very close to my heart. The first one is Kreyòl at NYU. Kreyòl at NYU is the hashtag I've been using from day 1 of my work at CLACS. And I did this on purpose because I think it's super important to document the work that is being done around Haitian Creole. There's a lot of stuff out there, and sometimes you'll land on stuff that's not so good. And so I knew that at CLACS, I would be centering Haiti in all the work that I do. So I knew immediately that I wanted to have an easy way of making sure we could go back and see the work that we've done. And then anyone else moving forward can go back and look at the work that we've done. And so Kreyòl at NYU is the hashtag that you can use across all social media platforms to get a sense of what we've done over the years. And it's a lot of stuff, y'all. This is my 6th academic year at CLACS, and we're still going strong. Then we have this hashtag we don't eat trees. And I have to say it in that, in that tone of voice because it's true, we don't eat trees. There was a newscaster a few years back who was really on some, I don't know what she was on, but she said some stuff about Haitian people, and she was talking about Haitian kids eating trees, and the all of collective Haitian Twitter was like, oh, what? Excuse me, that's not true. And so there was this campaign to get her to talk right about Haitians, and so that ultimately led to a public apology from her. And so that's a good hashtag to go back and see the power of social media. And then I really love this hashtag shamelessly Haitian, which is very hard to say when you're listening. Shamelessly Haitian, which was a hashtag started by a professor of anthropology, Dr. Bertin Louis. He started this a few years back for Haitian Independence Day, which is on New Year's Day, January 1st. And on that day, Haitians will share reasons why they are shamelessly Haitian. So the shamelessly Haitian hashtag is a really great one to follow, especially if you're looking to find some really positive and bright information, news, content around Haiti. Cool. Let's keep going. I feel like we're going strong. I want to talk to you about Wikipedia. I have to give a disclaimer. Give me a chance before you write off Wikipedia. Give me a chance because, I had to be won over because I'm definitely from the generation of folks who, when I was in college, all my college professors were like, don't touch Wikipedia. Don't talk to me about Wikipedia. Do not cite Wikipedia. Do not even nothing about Wikipedia. So I know I had to be won over. So my disclaimer is, give me a chance. I'm going to win you over for Wikipedia. So a few years ago, I linked up with a really amazing Haitian woman named Alice Backer. And I learned that she had started this really cool initiative called Afro Crowd. And Afro Crowd is a push to get more Black, Brown, and Indigenous contributors to Wikipedia. Why is this important? It's important for the following reasons. When you do a Google search, I know you all know almost immediately the first or second result is a Wikipedia article. Yes or no? Give me some thumbs up if that's the thing. Yes. So if that's the reality for so many of us, we should then be asking, who is contributing to Wikipedia? Like, are we consuming information that is truly diverse? And the answer is no. So the majority of contributors to Wikipedia are white, male, English-speaking Americans. Y'all, this is not and cannot be the center of the world. I'm telling you this right now. It cannot be like this. And so Afro Crowd is an initiative to get more Black, Brown, Indigenous people on Wikipedia. And this is so super cool because one, anybody can contribute to Wikipedia, and two, because anyone can contribute to Wikipedia, we can put what's important to us also on Wikipedia. Okay, this for me is really the biggest takeaway. A couple of years after that, I learned about a nonprofit called WikiEDU, and although I think everyone here is K through 12. They work with universities, but I think it's important to share still the work that they do. At WikiEDU, what they do is they create spaces where university professors can create courses that are tailored around Wikipedia modules. So we walk students through what it means to use Wikipedia, what the actual behind the scenes looks like. I have to tell you, Wikipedia is so structured. There are so many checks and balances on Wikipedia. And it's important that we add our voices to there and encourage our students to add their voices, because if not, it's a lot. Okay, let me give you a particular example. So one year I had my students through WikiEDU create some articles around Haiti in the Wikipedia space. So the exercise I do with my students is they can contribute to the Haitian Creole Wikipedia or contribute to the English Wikipedia, but the article has to be centered around Haiti in some capacity. When I tell you the number of times I had one student's article be taken down because there was one contributor who had contributed so many times, he had achieved some sort of like ranking on Wikipedia, and he was, what was he doing? He was policing people's articles. Like, there are people on Wikipedia who really, because they know not everyone knows about the back end of Wikipedia, who are really out there taking down articles, flagging them when they shouldn't be flagged. And I think that we have to know that actually we all have the power to do this. So the more Black, Brown, and Indigenous people can bring their voices to Wikipedia in their own languages, the better it will be for us, and the better we'll be able to actually share our voices with one another. So over the years, we've contributed. This sounds like a lot, but it's not super a lot. We've contributed tens of thousands of words to Wikipedia, and edited tons and tons of articles. It's been so fun. My favorite thing to do is go to Haitian Creole articles and just edit the grammar because, you know, the orthography of Kreyòl is standardized, but the reason why Kreyòl is considered a historically undervalued language is that the majority of people in Haiti are not learning how to read and write in Haitian Creole. They're being taught in French as if French were their mother tongue. This is the biggest issue in Haiti. So when I tell my students at CLACS that it is such a privilege that they're able to learn Haitian Creole at this level, I really truly mean that, because native speakers of Kreyòl are not learning how to read and write in their own language. Cool, so there's a question. Yes, I've had students write articles in Haitian Creole, and I've had students write articles about Haiti and aspects of Haitian Creole language. So for example, one student wrote an article about like the history of rice in Haiti. Like, there's a whole history of American rice being brought to Haiti and truly dismantling the rice farmers in Haiti. So there's an article about that, but that was in English. And there are some people who write articles about, you know, prominent Haitian figures in Haitian Creole, in the Haitian Creole Wikipedia. So I'm going to play this video for you very quickly, just so you can hear a little bit about the work that Afro Crowd does.
Wikipedia is available in 299 languages. That includes many languages from African countries and the African diaspora, such as Igbo, Yoruba, Haitian Creole, English, Spanish, and French. Each of these language Wikipedias has its own rules, and some have considerably fewer entries than, say, English or Spanish. While the English version alone currently boasts over 5 million articles, Haitian Creole, for example, has 51,000, and Yoruba has only 31,000. There are also initiatives currently working to expand and to preserve collections on languages which are disappearing. Garifuna, a language spoken by descendants of West African, Central African, Island Carib, European, and Arawak peoples in the Americas, has been recognized as a historical world treasure by UNESCO. Endangered languages like these are in incubator mode on Wikipedia. That means they're waiting for the community to write about them. Do you speak any of these languages? You can click the link below to find out how you can contribute. To access Wikipedia in your preferred language, start at the homepage. That's www.wikipedia.org. There, you'll find links to some options such as English, Spanish, French, and Chinese prominently displayed. If you don't immediately see the language option you're looking for, scroll further down and you'll see every language option listed by the number of articles. Typically, the name for a site is the official 2-letter language code, followed by .wikipedia.org. For example, English would be en.wikipedia.org, Spanish, es.wikipedia.org, Yoruba, yo.wikipedia.org, Haitian Creole, ht.wikipedia.org, French, fr.wikipedia.org, and so on and so forth. See you in the next tutorial.
Okay, so today's breakout session is actually going to be centered around Wikipedia, but I'm going to explain what I'd like you to do in a little bit. So let me go back to here. So just to wrap this up, because I want to leave some time for questions. So what exactly is revolutionary teaching? So I think that Kreyòl teaches us that freedom means to take up space. I want to say that there's this like super complicated and multi, but I think it's as simple as taking up space. So asking yourself radically, how do I take up space as an educator? What do I bring to this space that I may not be aware of that is impacting how I interact with my students? How can I teach my students to take up space? Especially for those of you who have, Black, Brown, Indigenous students in your class. I know it took me a long time to understand that I'm allowed to take up space in the room. There's a lot of there's a lot that I am socialized to think about how I move in the world that needs to be unlearned. So how can you press your students to take up space? And then in what way does your teaching center freedom? And for me, this is a super important question. Like, how are you engaging with freedom in an authentic and honest way? How are you teaching your students so that when they leave you, they feel free, they feel like they've learned something that allows them to move in the world in a way that's authentic for them. Lastly, I want to talk about radical legacy building, and I want to remind you of the definition of the word radical: favoring extreme changes in existing views, habits, conditions, or institutions. For me, this is super important because there's so much that is institutionalized that we are not even aware of as educators. So how are you planning on creating some change in a radical way? And I say this not because I think you should go cut heads and burn houses, which was the motto of the Haitian Revolution, couper tête brûler caille. I'm not saying you should go out and do that. What I'm saying is, what does radical look like for you? What does it mean for you to change certain things that you know should be changed because they're not serving you and they're not centering revolutionary teaching, they're not centering the idea of freedom? And so my last question to you is, what are you planning to build radically? And in the spirit of some radical thinking and revolutionary teaching, I want to share this video with you from an elder named Samba Zhao, who's part of a really great musical ensemble in Haiti called La Musique. They just have like a really powerful roots sound. And he's playing a song that talks about Emperor Dessalines, who was one of the generals who led the Haitian Revolution. Yeah, I'm going to play this for you and then we'll pause here.
Pour la patrie, les nappes montées d'apport à comme centime, salut général empire des salines, les nappes descendent d'apport à comme centime. Pour les d'apport, pour la patrie, les nappes montées d'apport à comme centime, salut général empire des salines, les nappes descendent d'apport à comme centime. Na même bateau à nous tout n'a pas les ancêtres à la date. Na même bateau à nous tout là. N'a pas les ancêtres à la date. Na même bateau à nous tout n'a pas les ancêtres à la date. N'a pas les soldats aux sergents défilés. L'en campé sous garde à vous comme sentil. Merci pour ancêtres avec Catine Flon. L'en a voté pour nous toutes sentir fiers. Même bateau à nous toutes. Même bateau à nous toutes. N'a pas les ancêtres à la date. Même bateau à nous toutes là. Salut, c'est à la même bateau à nous tout
So yes, I'm going to pause here and ask you if you have any questions. We have about 7 or 8 minutes for questions. I did share really quickly in the chat that he was singing, which means we were all in the same boat. And for me, this is an important idea to think about when we, especially when we're doing that deep dive into what it means to educate in a radically revolutionary way. So I'll take questions, comments. Wynnie, that was wild. What are you talking about? Remember that we're moving with honnête and respect. So this is a space for you to ask the kinds of questions you might not normally ask elsewhere.
I think it was the whole portion where you focused on Wikipedia was very interesting. You know, that was a very interesting concept of encouraging people to, you know, to publish, you know, their thoughts and ideas on Wikipedia. Very interesting. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, Wikipedia is and can be a powerful tool because anyone can use it. It's the encyclopedia of the people. And if we are adamant about acknowledging everybody's humanity, then we should be encouraging everybody to take advantage of Wikipedia.
Can I chime in? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, so I just wanted to piggyback off of what Tom said about the Wikipedia part being interesting. Back in Brooklyn College, I always hear my professor reminding us of this saying, the story of the lion is always told from the perspective of the hunter. And that just speaks to me because I felt so compelled by what you said about being able to input what means something to me into Wikipedia. Again, because, you know, things are omitted or hidden from us on purpose or whatnot. So yeah, I just wanted to add that to the convo.
Thanks, Marks. Yeah, I think of, for example, Wikipedia has annual conferences, and I've been to several of them. And I'm thinking of an advocate that I met a few years ago whose work was centered around sign writing. I'm about to blow all of your minds. Sign writing is actual images of the signs that you make with your hands when you're using sign language. And it was, for me, an amazing thing to think about because people whose native language, for example, is American Sign Language, when they learn how to read and write in English, that's like learning a second language. And so someone created sign writing a few decades ago to help people whose native language is sign language so that they could actually see the symbols. I'm just doing all I know is the alphabet in ASL, but they would actually see like the letters of the alphabet as images, and they could use that to write what they need to write. For me, that was super powerful. So there's a whole Wikipedia page and like an incubator space to talk about sign writing. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about like using Wikipedia as a tool, not just for like sharing who we are, but also creating a space to highlight the stuff that's not usually highlighted. Any other thoughts or questions?
How easy is it to write on a Wikipedia page? Like, let's say I want to give it to my high school students. Can they do it, or what are the restrictions, or like, how do you get on there? Yeah, there's no age restrictions for Wikipedia. Although if you're working with younger students, you know, the same way you would, you know, share information about interacting on the internet safely in general with their guardians, it's the same kind of information you would share around Wikipedia. But the great thing about Wikipedia is that everything is tracked. Every comment you make, every edit you make, everything is tracked. So it's easy to see who has changed what, who's written what, who's edited what. For high school students, I would encourage you to do like maybe a tutorial around how to use Wikipedia. There's plenty of those on the Wikipedia space. And I'm also going to do something similar with you in the breakout rooms today, so you get a sense of how to use Wikipedia. The shortest answer is it's really easy. You actually don't even have to log in to Wikipedia to edit Wikipedia, although it does track your IP address, so it still does know who has done the edit. But the best thing to do is to create an account, which is what we're going to talk about in the next, Naki says participate in Wikipedia hackathons to learn how, AfroCrowd has some really great edit-a-thons. Wikipedia has annual conferences, both at the national and international level.
I actually found that when I participate in the hackathons that there actually is protocol for being able to enter information. Like you basically have to have a certain amount of sources before you can enter it in. So like, let's just say, for instance, there was this hackathon for African-American artists, and it was great because in the hackathon, the organizer started a spreadsheet and people began to populate the name of the artist, then it would offer, it said like 2 supporting articles for them where they were mentioned, and then whether they have a website, whether they already have a Wikipedia page that needs to be modified. So it was kind of cool because it was like this big open document, and like some people are good at writing, some people were good at researching, but it did need to have certain amount of sources to be able to even to enter that person into it. That keeps it from being like populated by things about like just my mom or somebody, you know. And I do love that you're saying like that we should democratize the information, but you know, it's kind of like, it can't necessarily be just about everybody, but that's kind of like something that I like, that construct and busting that construct. But anyway, I just wanted to let you guys know that's my experience.
Yeah, I actually am going to dive into that in the breakout sessions with you. So there's a lot of structure to Wikipedia. Even though anyone can contribute to Wikipedia, there are rules that you have to follow about inputting information on Wikipedia. And it's a lot. There's spaces where you can work on articles before they're actually published. And as Jackie correctly said, you know, you have to have sources that are well cited, and there are rules about what you can add to. Like, I would love to write a Wikipedia article about myself, but I cannot, because that's one of the rules of Wikipedia is you can't write about yourself. You can't write about family members. It's a lot of different things. But what I love the most about Wikipedia is all these protocols and is all this structure, because it means that there's something that everyone has to follow, and not just one person can dominate the space